He was in the hospital for a while, and it was a tough time for us. We are not sure how it happened, but it was a result of a really challenging delivery and a rough pregnancy. Poor Lorenzo passed away in the hospital, and I was there with my mom. My dad took a while to get there, and that made the loss of Lorenzo even harder. I remember being alone during that time, going up and down with Lorenzo, and taking care of him. I'm Flavia, and I'm here to support you. I'm a university teacher, and today I'm celebrating 50 years of life. I'm from the interior of the state of Sao Paulo, born in a tiny city there. I left the interior of the state of Sao Paulo to go to college to study. My childhood was very happy. I remember my dad, who has passed away, and many games. Life was warm and joyful. My father was an extremely happy person. My mother doesn't see. I'm a university professor, and today is my 50th birthday. I'm from a tiny town in the interior of the state of Sao Paulo. I left that town to go to college, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity one had. My childhood was really happy. My dad is already deceased, but I remember a lot of games and good times. My parents were very happy, and my mom never saw them fight. They were always very loving and supportive. My sister and I had a really good relationship, and my parents were always there for us. I think I didn't have anything that I can recall that was particularly bad or different from what Flavia experienced in adolescence. I was quite shy, an outsider, and a bit of an ugly duckling. I was a very quiet teenager because I was very timid and introverted. I didn't have many boyfriends, and I don't remember what they were called today. I didn't have many friends during my adolescence, and I wish I had more. I was very shy, especially during my teenage years. I didn't have many boyfriends back then, and I don't remember what we called them today. It was a very quiet time. I didn't have any boyfriends during my childhood, and the first relationship I considered a relationship was during my wedding. That happened in the very late phase of my life, after I had moved far from home to go to college. I did my bachelor's degree right after I started my master's degree at Unicamp. Adolescence is such an interesting time, isn't it? It's when we start to figure out who we are and who we want to be with. I didn't have any boyfriends when I was a kid, but when I got to high school, I started dating someone. I moved away from home to go to college, and during my master's program, I lived away from my parents. I had a few boyfriends here and there, but nothing too serious. In the end, I finished my master's degree from home on a Sunday afternoon. I lived in a republic with only girls, and one of my friends met a boy from Sao Paulo. I had already been living away from home for a while by the time I graduated. I lived away from my parents for my master's degree, and I had a few boyfriends here and there. But nothing really came of it. At the end of my master's degree, I was finishing my presentation at home on a Sunday afternoon. We lived in a republic only for girls, and one of my friends met a boy from Sao Paulo. When it was time for her to leave, I was with a friend, and this friend was my ex-husband. They entered the home right on Sunday afternoon, and my friend started unpacking his bags. We met that day, and we talked like this in the room. He told me that he was enchanted and started calling me every day. At that time, there was only the landline, and he started calling me every day. I was in Sao Paulo when they took her home. My friend, who was my ex-husband, and I entered the home on a Sunday afternoon. My friend, who was my ex-husband, unpacked his bags and I met him that day. We talked like this in the room, and he told me he was enchanted and started calling me every day. At that time, there was only the landline, and he started calling me every day and coming to my house in Campinas, which is very close to Sao Paulo. He lived in Sao Paulo, and he started going to my house, and we started to practically see each other. We saw each other almost every day. He's older than I am by 12 years, so he already had a career and financial stability. In these conversations, I ended up telling him I would like to do a doctorate at USP, and he asked why I don't. I started going to Campinas, which is very close to Sao Paulo. He lived in Sao Paulo, and he started going to my house. We started spending a lot of time together, and we started to practically see ourselves as a couple. We saw each other almost every day. He's older than I am by 12 years, so he already had a career and financial stability. During these conversations, I said I would like to do a doctorate at USP. He asked, "Why don't you?" I said, "Look, I was never in Sao Paulo. I think I was in Sao Paulo once, but I don't know. They are in Sao Paulo. I don't even know how it is." He said, "Is just one sleep." He spoke like this, "Then, when you finish your master's degree, you can stay in my house until you get familiar with the city. If you decide you want to live elsewhere, that's fine." And so I did. I said, "Look, I was never in Sao Paulo. I think I was in Sao Paulo once, but I'm not sure. They are in Sao Paulo, I guess. I don't even know how it is." He spoke like this, "Then, you know, when you finish your master's degree, you can stay there until you get familiar with the city. If you decide you want to live elsewhere, that's fine," and so I did. The other week, I went to his home, and I remember that I arrived at his house on a Sunday. On Monday, I already knew that existed, right? The doctorate in my area at USP in Health Sciences was at the ICB Institute of Biomedical Sciences from USP. I asked how I did to arrive there. He guided me. I took a subway and a bus. I arrived at USP and did very well. I received, I think, the first one of the first people I saw. I recently finished my master's degree, and I am so proud of myself. The other week, I went to his home, and I remember arriving on a Sunday. By Monday, I was already familiar with the doctorate program in my area at USP in Healthy Paulo, which was at the ICB Institute of Biomedical Sciences from USP. I asked how I could get there, and he kindly guided me. I took the subway and bus, and I arrived at USP, where I was welcomed with open arms. As soon as I arrived, my advisor greeted me warmly and introduced me to the postgraduate program. He was a wonderful person who showed me the laboratory and said that if I passed the selection process, he would be my advisor. I returned home at the end of the day, already feeling happy because I had already found the place I had agreed to go to and had found a possible advisor. Only the selection process was left to complete. I was proud of myself, and when we were new, we were both excited. As soon as I arrived, my advisor introduced me to postgraduate studies. She was a wonderful person who showed me the laboratory and said that if I passed the selection process, she could be my advisor. I returned home at the end of the day, happy because I had already found the place I had agreed to go to and had found a possible advisor. All that was left was the selection process. I was proud, and when we were new, everything seemed a little easier. Then I remembered that the other week, I did the selection process and was approved. I started the doctorate and felt secure in the relationship because he was an older person. I didn't depend on him financially, but he was a very good emotional and financial support. I cannot deny that he paid the rent, but I didn't pay anything. I think the question of protection was very important. Everything seems a little easier now, and I'm really grateful for that. But then I remember that the other week, I was doing the selection process, and I was approved. I started the doctorate, and I was looking at it as a great source of security because he was an older person. I didn't depend on him financially, but he was a very good emotional support. I cannot deny that he paid rent, but I didn't pay anything, right? I think the question of protection was very important. Today, I don't know if I went to St. Paulo because I liked it or because I wanted to be with him. I had a dream that I wanted to do a doctorate at USP, and he only supported it. It was a very good relationship, and he was very quiet. He wasn't a jealous person, and I never went there either. But my big problem has always been absence, right? Even during the dating period, I remember ending with him for some. I'm not sure if I went to St. Paulo because I liked it or because I wanted to be with him. I had a dream that I wanted to do a doctorate at USP, and he was the only one who supported it. He contributed to our relationship, and he was never jealous. I never went on dates either. My big problem has always been his absence right from the dating period. I remember ending with him twice because I thought he was awkward. I had to be asking for attention, right? I remember a time when I finished because I was almost a week away from living in the same house as him. He would leave very late and come home very early. I remember calling him and finishing by phone because I said I couldn't take it anymore. I dated since I dated me, and I'm still dating. I thought he was an orc, so I asked twice. I guess I was asking for attention. I remember one time when I finished because I hadn't seen him for almost a week. I was practically living in the same house as him. He arrived very late and left a lot early. Then, I remember I called him, and we finished by phone because I said I couldn't take it anymore. I dated since I dated him, who left the office. He was an accountant at the time, and I wasn't seeing him. Then, he ran to the apartment. He always spoke about that absence. I will not finish because that's not what I want. Then, he had a way to reverse the situation, and it became present for a period of time. But soon it came back again, and it was before. I was married to him for 20 years. If someone were to ask me today, what was the reason for your separation? I would answer, loneliness. I was 20 years married to a person who, if anyone were to ask me today, what beer brand did you like? I wouldn't know. The same goes for, what was your favorite food? I don't know. But he was always extremely careful, extremely educated, gentle, and affectionate. He didn't know much, and I didn't know that I didn't have. My dear friend Flavia asked me today, what was the reason for your separation? My loneliness. I was 20 years married to a person who, if anyone asked me today what beer brand I liked, I don't know if anyone asked that. I don't know, right? But it has always been extremely careful, extremely educated, gentle, affectionate. I didn't have much of that. I didn't have many kisses, and I don't know if I didn't have them either. I thought it was because of the difference. That's why my relationship was different from my colleagues. I always thought that this absence was because he was a guy who was already financially established and had an excessive amount of work, which was completely different from my friends, who at the time were 22, 23 years old, or a little less than that, and they had a boyfriend who was the same age. Then I started to think. I thought it was because of the difference in our circumstances. I always thought that my colleague's absence was because he was a guy who was already financially established and had a lot of work, which was completely different from my friends, who were around 22 or 23 years old and had boyfriends around the same age. I started to think that it was normal for him to be absent because he was older and had different responsibilities than my friends' boyfriends. We were a different couple, and these differences included his absence. It was like that throughout the dating period. It's interesting because we talk about people having signs all the time, but we don't pay attention to each other. We decide to misinterpret the situation to make ourselves feel better, right? It's interesting how we misinterpreted the situation for different reasons. I went to Sao Paulo for 4 years for my doctorate, and then I passed a federal university contest here in Mato Grosso. We sold everything we had there and bought a farm here. I realized after my separation that I had to learn. I separated 5 years ago, and I managed to get divorced last November. After I moved to Sao Paulo for my doctorate, I started a new chapter in my life. I was there for 4 years, and then I passed a contest at a federal university in Mato Grosso. I sold everything we had in Sao Paulo and bought a farm here in Mato Grosso. I realized that I had to learn to take care of myself after my separation. I separated 5 years ago, and I got divorced last November. That's when I realized that I had been taking care of him too much. I spoke to him, and he took care of me a lot. He's older, and he was trying to make up for his absence. He made me feel like I was in a state of alienation, especially financially. When I separated, I didn't have a sense of the value of money. I saw something I needed to buy, and I asked who was on the after I separated. I realized that I had been taking this protection and care too far. I had been speaking to him a lot, and he was taking care of me because I was older and also to compensate for his absence. He was taking me for a state of alienation, in the very financial sense. I remember that when I separated, I didn't have a sense of the value of money. I saw something I needed to buy, so I asked who was on the side and said, "This value that they are charging me, that they are asking for, is expensive or it's cheap." It's such a great alienation that I don't know how much I won by month. I remember once, during therapy, my therapist started to speak. She said, "Look, you need to start taking care of your life." Taking care of your life includes also the financial issues, right? You need to have control of what you spend, how you spend, and so on. I was talking with my boss one day, and he said, "Hey, I'm not sure how much I'm earning this month. I need to check my records." I told him, "PA, I'd like to see my payment history. I want to see my cards so I can pay my bills." He replied, "You're getting paid more than you thought, right?" I said, "Yeah, but how come? I thought my pay was over." He said, "Flavio, you know how much you earn each month. You know how much you spend on this house. You can't pay for everything with your salary." One day, I asked him for the card, explaining that I needed it to pay my bills. He replied, "Your salary is over." I asked, "How so?" He said, "Flavio, you know how much you earn per month. You know how much this home costs. Your salary can't cover these expenses." I told him that I really had a life, and it was extremely out of my boss's control. I had a helper who was at home when we spoke. She was a lady who I worked for, doing the cleaning of the house. I had drooled the day I had night barbada. I had no idea, he said, and how here, the city of the interior by example. Everything you will buy in stores like I will mark here. Then he was paying. I had a really nice life, and my helper was a wonderful lady who cleaned my house. I had a helper, Barbada, who came from the city. He would buy things from stores and bring them home. He didn't need money because he bought things on the market. I didn't see or know about it. I separated from him, and I remember that when I left, I lost the internet because I didn't pay. I didn't buy anything for a while. Every time he came from the farm, he bought things on the market. I didn't even think about money. I didn't see or know about it. That was how it was for me. I separated, and there was an interesting episode that I remember. When I separated, I cut the energy at home. I was without internet because I had to pay for the ticket. I didn't have the habit of doing these things. I saw that I was without energy because I didn't pay the bill, but I paid the bill because I didn't have the money. I didn't have the habit. Nowadays, I can have an agenda and it's a little better with money. But what causes that? I forgot to pay the ticket, and I felt terrible. I'm not used to doing things this way. I felt so tired because I hadn't paid the bill. I didn't have the money, but I paid it anyway. I'm not used to having money, but I'm working on it. I have an agenda, and it's helping me a little with money. But I'm still struggling. I blamed myself, but I'm not a dumb woman. I left home to get my degree. I lived far from my parents, and I went to graduate school alone. My parents didn't support me, but I still went. I'm not used to doing postgraduate studies, but I'm doing them. My father was well off, but I felt so guilty for so long. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I left home to pursue my education, and I felt like I was in a situation where I didn't have a lot of support. I'm not a dumb woman. I left home to get my degree, and I lived far from my parents. I went to graduate school on my own. My parents didn't have a postgraduate degree, but they wanted me to have one. My dad was a person who didn't have a lot of studies like this. He didn't have a formal contract, and he died. I still don't have a formal contract. I went after it because I wanted to do the right thing. I'm not a bad mother. I left home to get my degree. He didn't have many studies like this, and he was talking like that. But my daughter was studying for her doctorate, and she was talking like that. She won't stop studying. You need to have a formal contract, right? The poor thing died, and I still don't have a formal contract. But I went after it because I wanted to, for example, like that mother who left home to do. My father was a teacher, right? I didn't have things I wanted and ran back alone. Then I said, I created with all comfort, if I have a job stable. I think I win relatively well, eh? Let yourself get to a point in life where she doesn't. You know how much the value of things costs, right? How this woman leaves herself having a profession, going to work every day, leaving home every day, talking with people with. Master, you know my father, who was a teacher. I didn't. I had things I wanted and ran back alone. Then I said, created with all comfort, If he's in a situation where he has a stable job, I think I win relatively well. Let yourself have a point of life where she doesn't. You know how much the value of things costs, right? How this woman leaves herself having a profession, going to work every day, leaving home every day, talking with people who were so instructed. Wed, much more if it lets you get to a situation in which she loses. It is the command of your own life, because so everything was very easy, everything was good, and then you will settle down. I didn't need to worry about issues. So financially, I didn't know how much it was worth. The money I had was good, and I had a comfort of a good house of employees. Then it was good, and the absence was supported and tolerated. This loneliness hurt. My colleagues were so kind and supportive. They really wanted to help me feel at ease, and they were right. Everything was so easy, and everything was good. I didn't have to worry about money, and I had a great team of employees. I felt so comfortable, and I was able to take care of myself and my family. But, oh, the loneliness, it was so painful. I had some tough times, and I had some episodes. I keep imagining people as I pass by. That's why I'm the mother of a beautiful boy. He's adopted, and I didn't have any children of my own. But it wasn't a problem either. I remember when I won Gabriel on my first Mother's Day, I started looking anxiously a week before. Imagine that Mother's Day right on the weekend. I've had some tough times, and I've had some really tough days. I keep imagining people as I pass by. I'm the mother of a beautiful boy. He's adopted, and I didn't have any biological children. But it wasn't a problem either. I remember when I won Gabriel on my first Mother's Day, I started looking anxiously a week before. I imagined that Mother's Day would be on the weekend. I started on Monday, and I was already anxious. I remember calling him and saying, "Please, God, don't leave me alone on my first Mother's Day. I want to celebrate Mother's Day with my son as a family." I stayed in that anxiety, waiting for him to arrive. It didn't arrive right away, and that absence is so bad because it isolates you from social life. I remember once at home, I made a Christmas. I started on Monday, and I was already feeling anxious. I remember calling Revan and saying, "Please, don't leave me alone on my first Mother's Day. I want to celebrate it with my son as a family." I stayed in that anxious state, waiting for him to arrive. It didn't, and that absence is so hard on me because it keeps me from socializing. I remember once at home, I made a Christmas party. I invited friends to come to my house, and I regretted it halfway through because I said, "My God, I invited so many people to my house. We'll do a reverse here. If he doesn't come and if he doesn't appear," and because my friends said I was a widow of a living husband who had one that spoke like this, I thought, even affectionately, as soon as my husband was the same hair of a nun, everyone. I invited my friends to my home for a party, and I remember feeling a bit guilty halfway through because I thought, "My God, I invited so many people to my house. We'll do a reverse here. If he doesn't show up, I'll be a widow with a living husband." My friends said I was like this. I thought, even affectionately, that my husband was the same hair of a nun. Everyone knows that, but no one has ever seen right. I started to worry about the party because I thought, "My God, if he doesn't appear, what an excuse I'm going to give them, guests, because he didn't come, because he didn't appear." I remember that he arrived an hour late at night, dirty, from the farm, taking off his business clothes. I remember passing Revan, extremely upset, and he made me feel better. I know that it has, but deep down, I'm worried about that party because I'm thinking, what if he doesn't show up? What excuse will I give the guests? I'll have to say that he didn't come because he didn't want to. I remember that he arrived late, missing an hour of the party, and he was tired from working on the farm. I remember passing Revan, who was really upset, and he calmed me down. We talked, listened, and worked together. I'm not going on vacation. I'm working as if I had to understand and accept his absence and adapt to it. Because he wasn't with women, he wasn't fishing with friends, and he was working. I'm not lying when I say that over 20 years, no betrayal occurred, but I think that as soon as the pain of absence has always been so big, it's not even a problem. Everything is working just right. I'm not going on vacation. I'm working as if I have to understand and accept the absence and make it normal because I wasn't with women, he wasn't fishing with friends, and he was working. I'm not lying. Over 20 years, no betrayal occurred, but I think that when the guys speak to me like this and tell me these stories of betrayal, I don't know what I'm saying. I didn't even feel the pain, because the absence has always been so big that the rest was a minor pain, right? And there's something else, too, in relation to our son. I had Gabriel at 32 years old, and the adoption process happened when I was 32. Deep down, today, I am aware. When I was younger, I used to think that if I had a child, it would fix everything. I thought that if I had a son, he would be more present in my life. But I didn't realize that I would have to adopt. I had this desire to be a mother, and I decided that if I had a child, I would either adopt or have a biological child. But I didn't know that I would have to adopt. At the time, I really wanted to be a mom. I had that desire, you know. But today, I'm more aware that when I decided to have a child, I thought, I'll have a biological child, or I'll adopt one. But I didn't know that I'd have to adopt. I just thought, I'll have a child, because if I had a son, he'd be more present, you know. He'd want to see his son, and he'd want to be with his son. But today, I'm more aware that that's not the way to think. I tell my current partner, I made a mistake, just like most women do. You arrange a child thinking it'll fix your wedding, or you have a child thinking he'll manage your marriage. But that didn't happen. When I realized I didn't want to be a mom, I stopped taking care of my child. When he comes home, he'll want to see the baby. He'll want to be with the baby. I know that. I'm speaking to my partner about this now, and I know I made a mistake. Most women make mistakes, right? You arrange a child thinking it will fix your marriage. You have a child thinking he'll manage your marriage to you. What didn't happen? When I solved it, I wanted to be a mother. I no longer took care of the baby. I didn't take any birth control, but I was grateful we already had what almost X. If you found a date, how long had I been dating? Almost 10 years, or one little less. But I didn't get pregnant right there when I decided not to. I will be pregnant, so I bought a contraceptive card that lasted 3 months. I never got pregnant, but I also never stayed right. I already had an instability, and I was already married. Without contraception, none of this would have happened, but I was grateful we already had it. I was almost 10 years old when I found out I was pregnant. I decided not to get pregnant, so I bought a contraceptive card that lasted 3 months. I never got pregnant, but I did experience some instability in my marriage. When I decided to have children, I even waited a year to get pregnant. My doctor at the time said, "Hello, Flavia. There is no problem. Everything is perfect. I did all the tests. Everything is okay. You just need to wait a little longer." In a second conversation, my doctor said, "Look, we will need to investigate the..." Right then, I decided to have a child, so I waited for a while, but it didn't happen. I went to my doctor, and he said, "Hello, Flavia. Everything's fine. I did all the tests, and everything's okay. But, you know, time is passing, and I'm starting to worry." Then, my doctor said, "We'll need to investigate the issue." I replied, "With you, everything's okay. But, you know, I've got to have you do something, because it's a very minor issue." He replied, "I'll have to come in for an exam. I don't know if this will keep me from work, and I don't know what I said when I suggested we could adopt." "Dad, you're always so right. Everything is always okay with you." I said, "Let's have you do something too, because it's really great." But then I thought, oh, I'll have to take an exam. I don't know what I said, but I think it was something like, "We can adopt." I said, "We can adopt because I want a son." I see many women today who have biological children. My dream was to have a child, to adopt a child. He said, "Let's look into it." I said, "We can adopt a child. I want to be a mother." I didn't feel that need for a belly, gestation, breastfeeding, and I'm okay with that. I went straight to the heart of the adoption process, wanting to understand how it could work for me. I'm going to share some insights that I hope will help you on your journey towards a warm and welcoming adoption. In this country, the process is legal, but it's still complicated and takes time. My adoption was a little different because I adopted a child from an Indigenous community. I started to feel anxious, thinking about how I had to talk to a psychologist during the adoption process. I remember thinking that she wanted to know if the parents were capable of raising a child and if they were the right people for adoption. I was afraid because I thought the psychologist would talk to the parents and say something like, "He will be adopted." I remember how anxious I was during the process of adoption. There was a psychologist there, and I had to talk to her. I think she wanted to know if the parents were capable of raising a child. I remember feeling afraid because I thought she would tell the adoptive parents that I didn't want to be adopted. I didn't have time, and I remember going to the psychologist's office first. I scheduled an interview with her, but he couldn't go the first time. The second time, I called and said, "Look, you go to this interview with the psychologist and say what needs to be said, because I can solve the question of being a mother on my own." I think it was the first time that I must have said something like that. I remember when Gabriel was here, I went to the psychologist first. I had a chat with him, and then I had an interview with him. I was a little nervous, but it went well. I was anxious about the next phase, and then we became eligible for adoption. I remember that day when I adopted my son. When you become eligible for adoption, you join a waiting list, and that can be a little stressful. You never know when your baby will be born. He was a little scared, but that's normal. Everything went well during the interview with the psychologist. I remember feeling anxious, waiting for the next phase to pass so we could adopt Gabriel. I remember the day I adopted him because when you're eligible for adoption, you join a waiting list, which can be stressful. You never know when your baby will arrive. I remember when Gabriel arrived. I was at university and got a call saying, "I'm an assistant social worker. Gabriel is here, but he's a little weak. He's in Kasai, and he's going to be adopted." I didn't know what Kasai was. It's a support house for families from Indigenous villages in the city. When I arrived, I was a little nervous, and I remember saying to Gabriel, "Look, I'm the assistant social worker. I have a child here who is a little weak. She's in Kasai, and she's going to be adopted." I didn't know what Kasai was. It's a support house for families from Indigenous villages in the city while they are receiving medical treatment. Gabriel was in the house with the biological mother, and there were some cultural issues that prevented them from accepting children of single parents. I don't know why the family didn't want Gabriel. When I took Gabriel, he was already 12 days old and had pneumonia and malnutrition. I remember the girl who called me and said, "Look, I'm with a child who is a little weak." I was going through some medical treatment when I got the call. Then Gabriel was in the house with the biological mother, and there's a series of cultural issues that they don't accept children of a single mother. I don't know how the family didn't want Gabriel. When I took Gabriel, it was already 12 days, and he had pneumonia and was malnourished. I remember the girl who called me and said, "Look, I'm with a child. She's a little weakened, but that's all." I think the girl imagined that I knew that Kasai was a health support house for Indigenous people. I don't. I knew I got it. My mother, who was in the house that day, put me in the car and said, "Mother, my son has arrived. Let's go search him." I went to the car of the assistant social worker. We entered the time that we were away from the city, right? And here, the people have a lot of prejudice against Indigenous people. No one. I'm a child who lives in the house. I think the girl imagined that I knew that Kasai was a health support house for Indigenous people. I didn't, but I knew I got it. My mother, who was in the house that day, put me in the car and said, "My son is arriving. Let's go search him." We went to the car of the assistant social worker. We entered the time that we were coming away from the city. Right? And here, the people have a lot of prejudice against Indigenous people. No one, I like it there. Arriving at Mari, my mother spoke. So, my God in heaven, this is a thing of Indian. I spoke, "Mother, for the love of God, right? Don't say anything, just listen to us. It's going to be a child." She turned and spoke like this, "But Flavia and I, if it's an Indian that he's doing here." I said, "Mother, doesn't say anything. We are just going to know here because my mother had a prejudice too. Like everyone here, I find it difficult. I remember when I got to the hospital and my mother was there. I was a week away from my own wedding, and I was having a really hard time with my chest pain. I asked my mother, "God, if it's an Indian man, please tell me." But she didn't say anything. She just listened to us. Then she turned to Flavia and said, "If it's an Indian man, I don't know how to react." I said, "Mother, don't say anything, we'll figure it out." I was finding it difficult, just like everyone else here. Then I got to the hospital and went to the nursing room. There were 3 beds, and I sat in the last one. I remember the nurse came in with Gabriel, who was very dirty, hungry, and desperate. The biological mother was about 15 years old. I cried and asked the social worker, "You told me to ask the mother to breastfeed him." Then she asked her assistant, "Mother, she doesn't want to breastfeed, but the mother." I got to the hospital and went to the nursing room. There were 3 beds, and I sat in the last one. I remember the nurse arriving with Gabriel. He was very dirty, crying because he was hungry and desperate. The biological mother, who was about 15 years old, was there too. I cried while talking to the social worker. She told me that the mother had asked for breastfeeding, but the mother didn't want it. She gave Gabriel a bottle of breast milk and then slept. I remember that I was there when Gabriel was crying. The social worker spoke about the process, and I said that I wanted to hold my mother. She said that she didn't want to, but I insisted. I said, "I want to hold him." I remember that when I took Gabriel on my lap, I had felt an unbearable pain in my chest for a week. I remember being there with Gabriel, and I remember feeling so grateful for the support I received. I was there when Gabriel was born, and I was there when he was in the hospital. I was there when he was in the NICU, and I was there when he was in the pediatrician's office. I was there when he was in the foster home, and I was there when he was in the hospital. I was there when he was in the pediatrician's office, and I was there when he was in the hospital. I was there when he was in the NICU, and I was there when he was in the pediatrician's office. I was there when he was in the hospital, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the pediatrician's office, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the hospital, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the pediatrician's office, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the hospital, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the pediatrician's office, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the hospital, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the pediatrician's office, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the hospital, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the pediatrician's office, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the hospital, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the pediatrician's office, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the hospital, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the pediatrician's office, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when he was in the hospital, and I was there when he was in the NICU. I was there when I thought I was going to die, but the pain passed. I looked at her and said, just like I do to take my child. So, all these moments I passed alone. Then she said, look, this is a slightly different adoption, because if it involves an Indigenous child, there are more bureaucracies than in a typical adoption. He said, more tomorrow. He will have to stay here with his mother, but we'll get in touch tomorrow to figure out how we'll do the procedures. The other day, a child support nurse called me and said Gabriel was quite unwell. I asked her to take him to the hospital so a pediatrician could evaluate him. I remember that he even arrived at the funambulist clinic. There is another story, but I'll save it for another day. He arrived at the nurse's office, and the doctor understood and said, we need to take this urgent boy to the hospital. I remember leaving with this boy from the office. I went to the hospital in our city to try. I told him that Gabriel was in bad shape, and then I asked to take him to the hospital so a pediatrician could evaluate him. I remember that he even arrived at the Funam clinic. There's another story, but I'll save it for another time. What I remember is that the nurse understood the doctor's request and said, we need an urgent boy here. I remember leaving with this boy from the office and going to the hospital in our city to try to intern him without documentation or legal custody. I remember the father arriving, I think almost 2 days later. He took my son on his lap before the father of Gabriel and the new one. I thought all this was normal. Yeah, I won Gabriel, and the absence continued. But in those absences, it began to stay. It's more hurt because I felt the absence and felt guilty for my son having an. I remember how I felt when the father came almost 2 days later. I was trying to take care of my son, and I was worried that Gabriel would be upset because he didn't have a father. I thought it was normal, but it was really hard. I felt so guilty because I felt like I wasn't enough for my son. I tried to make up for it by being there for him, but it was still really hard. Today, I asked my son if he thought it was okay for me to be a mom. I told him that I was trying my best, and that I was worried that Gabriel would always need a psychologist. I'm a mom, and I know how hard it can be, but I'm trying to do the best I can. I'm worried about Gabriel because I'm not sure how he'll deal with this situation. I want everything to be comfortable for him, so I've had him see a psychologist since he was 4. I've been working with the same psychologist since then, and she's been great. She's helped him a lot. I'm worried about the absence, but I didn't mean for it to happen that way. I'm not sure how I dealt with this situation. I wanted everything to be very comfortable for him, so I made sure he had a psychologist from the age of 4 until he was 17. He and his psychologist spoke to each other, and he was quiet and calm. This absence hit me hard. I didn't mean to, but I have the feeling that I backed away from my professional life and social life. I had no idea what it was like to go out on the weekends or have dinner at friends' houses because of the city's interior location. I always invited a family member to dinner because they didn't have a habit of going out. You know, I have this feeling that I kind of lost touch with my professional life. I guess I just didn't have much time for socializing. I don't know how it happened, but I just stopped going out on the weekends and didn't really know what it was like to have dinner at friends' houses. I guess it's because we are in the middle of the country, so it's always just me and my family at home. I don't really have a habit of going out at night. I guess I don't have the habit of frequenting my friends' houses without my husband. Every time I went, I had an excuse. I guess I got a bit tired of this business, and I just stopped going. I didn't have a social life, and I didn't want to go to birthday parties because I didn't want to feel embarrassed. At night, I would be by myself at home, and I felt like I was stuck in a rut. I couldn't go to my friends' houses without my husband, and it felt like I was always making excuses. There was a time when I just felt so tired of this whole situation that I stopped going out. I didn't have much of a social life, and I didn't want to go to my ex-husband's birthday parties because I didn't want to have to explain his absence. This decision made things more difficult for me. It was hard to start something new, and it was really hard to go places by myself. Theoretically, having someone is much easier. You just have to be alone, and you don't have to make excuses for why you're going places by yourself. It's hard to talk about, but it's because of the fights we had over 20 years. I don't remember having a harsh conversation to the point of screaming with you or you screaming with me. We never had a very bad relationship, but we did see an inertia of 20 years for something that already bothered us at the dating stage. It's hard to feel alone in a relationship for 20 years. It's hard to feel alone as a mother. I remember how we talked about it, and how we realized that our relationship was full of conflict. It was a struggle for 20 years, and it was hard to even talk to each other. I don't remember us getting very upset. We were both there for each other, and we were there for 20 years. It's hard to feel alone in a relationship, and it's hard to feel that way for 20 years. I cried a lot before you did, and I was there for you when you cried. Gabriel is such a kind person, and he understands me. We have a very strong connection, and he knows when I am sad. He always tells me, "Mommy has a headache, Mommy has a pain in her head." He's grown so much, and now he speaks to me like a mother who has a headache. I started to feel lonely, and I cried a lot. Gabriel was there for me, and we had a very special connection. He knew when I was sad, and he would come to me and say, "Mommy, your head hurts." He was right. He was only 18 at the time, and he understood. He would say, "Mommy, your head hurts." And I would realize that I was the only one who knew. When I separated, I remember the first sensation I had after despair. I asked myself, how do I pay for such a thing? I received this month. You can create my son. I remember the first sensation I had, and it was not to feel alone. It was very crazy because I had been married for 20 years, and then I dated for 4 more years. My son, I should have realized that I was the only one who could do it. When I separated, I remember the first sensation I had, I felt despair. How do I pay for that? I received this month. I remember the first sensation I had, I didn't feel alone. It was crazy because I had been married for 20 years, and then I dated for another 4 years. I must have felt lonely for 24 years. When I separated, I felt no loneliness. I remember that when I didn't want that anymore. I started to pay attention to other people, especially other couples. I started thinking about other men. I said, "People, it's wrong. It's not right." Then I got it. When I started paying attention and becoming aware, I realized that it was really we had been together for 24 years, and then I felt lonely. I remember saying, "I don't want that anymore. I want to pay attention to other people, especially other couples." I started thinking about other men, and I realized that wasn't healthy. I said, "No, I need to get out of here. I need to leave that situation." My son was in adolescence at the time, and I wanted to stop feeling that way and have a normal life, just like everyone else. I had such a big heart that I didn't even have an idea of the value of money. Before I made my decision, I talked to my co-workers and said, I want to win the same amount that I earn. I said, no, I need to get out of here. I need to leave that situation. My son was in adolescence at the time, and I just wanted to stop feeling that way and have a normal life, you know. I wanted to be like everyone else. I didn't even have an idea of the value of money, but I imagined that I would talk to my co-workers and tell them that I deserved the same salary. I thought that if they got a raise, it would be similar to my raise for raising my child. I told him as soon as I didn't want to, and that I wanted to separate. In the first conversation, he said, I'm not busy now. I'm going to the farm. When we get there, we can talk about it. I know you know it's like that, eh? We had a long talk the second time we sat down together. I said, look, I'm talking about this, right? I really wish I could separate myself from this. He started blaming my psychologist, and then he blamed a friend I had for a long time. She had also separated, but her husband was abusive. I said, so it's not my fault. I'm nobody. I can't take it anymore, he said, his voice tinged with emotion. But how can you not stand a life? Perfection isn't for you. You miss nothing, you don't care about anything. You can't take the loneliness, right? Flavia, I think he still doesn't understand how lonely it is for us, how it doesn't accept us. We talk about it, but it's in his head. He was always a father to me. He was a wonderful father, wasn't he? He made sure we had birthdays and other important celebrations at home. I used to sleep through my baseball games, but I had to fight to take my son to practice. Then, he went through a phase. When that phase passed, I didn't believe it. Then, when he went through a phase of revolt, I was on my side. I was capable of doing the right thing because I didn't do it. I had another situation come up, and I decided to try to see things as they are. It was actually pretty normal, and that's how I ended up with a second adoptive child. The first one is 2 years older, and as I mentioned, my first child, Gabriel, is of Indigenous origin. Sometimes the staff has a prejudice about Indigenous people, and sometimes it's not so obvious. They say they don't like an Indian there, and I adopted Gabriel when he was a baby. I don't feel that way anymore. I hadn't really considered having another child, but I wanted one. I thought I was already taking care of my needs, but then a friend called me and said, Flav, I have a child here who was just born. She's Indigenous, and her family doesn't want her. She's going to adoption. I went to meet her, and she said Lorenzo was a 9-month-old baby. Lorenzo was a normal child, but he had some health challenges. He was probably born prematurely and had a series of problems. I was a new mother, and I already had a reputation as the mother of an Indian child. This was easier than the first situation. I took Lorenzo to the hospital, where he stayed for a week before going home. He has always been sick, but Lorenzo was much more so. I left running with the boy. Lorenzo was a normal child, but he faced some challenges early on. I was already familiar with the hospital as the mother of an Indian child, so it was an easier transition than the first time. Lorenzo was hospitalized for a week and then went home, but he was always sicker than Gabriel. One day, Lorenzo started having problems, so I took him back to the hospital. Lorenzo passed away a few months later. He always had an enlarged abdomen and was often in the hospital. One day, my father was working on the farm, and we didn't know how to deal with it. We later found out that it was a result of a difficult delivery and pregnancy. Lorenzo died at the hospital. My mother was with me, and my father took a long time to arrive. I remember that after Lorenzo was in the hospital for a while. He was always in pain and had a swollen abdomen. He was always in and out of the hospital, and it was really tough on us. Lorenzo died at the hospital. My mother was with me, and it took my father a long time to arrive. I was really struggling after Lorenzo passed away. I am quite short, around 60 kilograms, and I remember weighing 406 kilograms the last time I checked. I didn't weigh myself after that, but I lost more weight, which is why Lorenzo passed away. I remember everything after Lorenzo's death. I remember loading Lorenzo up and down, alone, in the morning. Yes, I had the nanny of night taking care of Gabriel. I was really bad, I'll admit it. I'm 60 kilograms, and I remember weighing 406 kilograms the last time I checked. Then I didn't weigh myself anymore, but I lost weight, which is when I lost Lorenzo. I remember her alone after losing Lorenzo. I remember this period when I'd load Lorenzo up and down, alone, by myself. Yes, I had a nanny who worked at home with Gabriel. I had someone at home who took care of me, but I remember my parents more than my father. Then I got a job, and I got used to it. It was a difficult time, though. There were 2 children in this wedding, both adopted and of indigenous origin. Today, I only have Gabriel, who is a sweetheart. I say, if you have something I did well in life, it was that gentle, extremely polite boy. I remember having someone at home who worked from home, but I don't remember the emotional aspect as much. I remember my parents being with me in these moments more than the figure of my dad. Then, I normalized because it was working, but it was a difficult time. There were 2 children in this wedding, both adopted from indigenous communities. Gabriel, who is a sweetheart, is the only one who has remained in my life. I say that if there's something I did well in life, it was being that gentle, extremely polite boy. He's tender, sweet, intelligent, and easygoing. I owe these children a lot. During this whole period of feeling out, I remember not at the time of dating. It was the second time I arrived, finishing, and I felt alone. But then, I remember that I had already lived here in Mutagrosso before having Gabriel. I always spoke like this. I feel a lot, so alone. I don't like it. He said like this, not Flavia, but I'm working, not, but I need to work because we have to pay. Things are going really well for me, and I'm so grateful. I'm doing great. And he always spoke to me in a way that made me feel a bit uneasy. I'd tell him, hey, I'm not comfortable with the way you're talking to me. But you know, I'm not celebrating or fishing with my friends right now. I said, this isn't normal for me. You get lonely sometimes, and you don't want someone who's close to you, right? I totally get it. I'm doing really well, and I always said, me. But I'm feeling a bit uneasy. He always spoke to me in a way that made me uncomfortable, and I complained to him because of it. I felt alone because of the way he spoke, but I didn't realize that I was working, not celebrating, or fishing with my friends. I said, this isn't normal, right? Eventually, you feel alone and don't want to be close to someone, even if you understand this absence all the time. I can't stand feeling alone anymore, right? But I never did in these 20 years. I turned to him, and I said, I'll let go of you because you let me be alone. I'll let go of you because I just feel this way. He had all this control over this domain. He never imagined that I would be able to leave and separate from him because he had a lot. I'm really struggling with this absence. I can't seem to feel alone anymore, and it's been 20 years. I never asked him to leave, but I did say that I would if I felt I couldn't be with him. I'd say things like, I'll leave if you don't change. I even said I'd drop the wedding if I felt I could do it. I felt so guilty, and I thought, why didn't I make it clear that this was hurting me and that he could have changed our marriage? I said to him, Gabriel, if you don't change, I'll separate from you. I'll even drop the wedding. I felt so guilty, and I thought, I should have made it clear that this was bad for me and that I would have changed, and our marriage would have been better. But I don't think that's true. He never had another relationship or was involved with anyone else. I think that if I had taken this decision before, I wouldn't have suffered so much. But I'm always just me complaining and never trying to change, and that might have left more room for him to change. I'm not sure if I would have changed my behavior if I had made a different decision before. I'm worried that I'm always complaining and not changing my behavior, which might be why I'm suffering. I'm doing what I think is right by filling the bag, but I'm not sure if that's enough. I was a little surprised that he didn't imagine that I could maintain my decision. Gabriel has made this decision this month of November. The relationship between a father and his son has always been the same since Gabriel arrived home. He's okay, so okay, Daddy came in town to have a tractor. I'm not sure if we'll have lunch, but I'm excited to see him. I'm always amazed by how good a father he is. I sometimes wonder if my father was alive. He died when Gabriel was a child, so Gabriel has memories of him. But if Gabriel had spent his childhood and adolescence with my father, how different would he have been? I think Gabriel must have thought that. I'm not sure, but I think Gabriel might be seeing his father as the norm. I'm worried that if Gabriel doesn't feel this way, it might affect his relationship with his children. I'm also a little scared because I didn't have this kind of relationship with my father. I often talk about this when Gabriel is at the farm, especially during holidays when he spends time with his dad. I don't go there every weekend, though. I recently saw him on his father's birthday. I'm wondering if this is normal for a dad. I think it is, because I've noticed that Gabriel doesn't seem to want to be around the kids as much as he used to. I'm a little scared of this change, because I've noticed that he doesn't have it, but he does. I've been talking to him about it a lot, especially when Gabriel is at the farm with his dad during the holidays. I'm not going to be able to see him every weekend, though. I was there when he had his dad's birthday. He didn't stay with your son, did he? I think it's something I've learned from my relationship with my dad. I think I'm respecting this. I also think that my self-esteem was so low when I met my current husband that I had questions like that. I turned to him and asked, "Do you find me beautiful?" I asked him almost every day, and then someone. It didn't end up staying with your son, so I think it's a warm relationship. I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels this way. I think I have self-esteem issues because when I met my current husband, I had so many questions. I asked him, "Do you find me beautiful? Is it good to live with me? Do you feel horny to stay with me, almost daily?" Then someone asked me the same questions, but in a different way. They said that I need to hear from you that you don't. You're a beautiful woman, and I think you're extremely intelligent. I feel a strong desire for you, and it's unusual for me to need another person. This reaffirms my belief that you have gone through a period of significant rejection. I don't know if I was wrong about this. We always think that a relationship with infidelity and fighting is a bad one. I understand that it can be difficult to find the right person, and that you might need someone to reassure you that you don't. I think you're a beautiful woman, and I really do. I feel like you're very intelligent, and I think it's important to remember that you don't need anyone else. You probably went through a period where you felt really rejected, and I'm sorry if I wasn't there for you. I think we often think that a relationship is doomed if there's infidelity or fighting, but mine was never like that. We never used to be hostile or rude with each other. He wasn't affectionate like my current relationship is, but I learned that it can be different. I missed that in my past relationships, or at least I thought I did. I've seen several friends with husbands who are often not around, and they've learned to accept that situation. I've spoken to people who feel the same way. I'm not like that at all. I never used to be hostile or aggressive. I never was rude to him, but I wasn't affectionate either. I learned that this can be normal. I missed that before, or at least I found it. I've seen several friends with absent husbands, and they've made it seem normal. I've spoken to people who don't think it's normal to feel lonely when you're with someone. I think it's only logical to need some time alone, but I feel lonely when I'm with someone else. Loneliness is wrong, and it shouldn't be. I learned the value of things. I found that things are very important, but I went through this period right. It's been 5 years since I separated from my father. We basically only communicate via WhatsApp. I usually send a message that says, I sent a message, and the father became very busy and short on cash. He was so kind, though, and helped me out. I was 6 months behind on my college tuition, so I went and paid 6 installments. I had to learn to live on my salary to take care of myself and my son. The father helped, but I think he could have done more. I wasn't asking for help or asking for money. I took what I could get. I learned to be alone, and it was hard. I'm happy to share that my father was very supportive during this period, helping me with 6 months of college tuition. I was able to manage my finances and keep my son afloat. I am grateful for his assistance, but I believe I could have done more. I wasn't asking for support, but I learned a lot from the experience. Being alone has its challenges, but it's also a valuable lesson. Today, I'm happily living with my partner. We share a strong emotional connection and a deep sense of affection. I'm grateful that I don't feel the need to ask for physical affection from my current partner, as I did in the past. Sometimes, I do feel a need for physical closeness, but I'm learning to communicate this in a healthy way. I'm doing really well, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm in a great relationship, and I'm finally at a place where I can let go of the past. I'm feeling so much safer and more at ease these days. I'm also working on some personal stuff, like figuring out the value of my pension. I actually finished this a month before my divorce was finalized on November 14th. I didn't want to wait any longer, and I was able to do it on my own. I should have done this differently in the past, but I'm glad I'm finally getting it right. I'm more at ease now, and I'm grateful for that. A month before Gabriel's 18th birthday, I settled the pension issue. I signed on the 14th of November, not because I didn't want to do it before, but because I couldn't. I was never in a position to do so, and it was never my desire. My ex-husband didn't have this problem, so only at the beginning, when there was that business. Let's go back and look at what you're doing and pay attention to the beginning. Yes, after no longer bothering me, he did not help me the way I think I should. But if it were for him, we would be married today on paper because of the equity issue. These businesses are right, but I divorced. I never felt this way about my ex-husband. I didn't have this problem at the beginning, when there was a business. Let's go back and look at what you're doing and pay attention to the beginning. Yes, after no longer being a person who bothered me, did not help me the way I think I should. But if it were for him, we would be married today on paper because of the equity issue. These businesses are right, but I divorced on November 14th. Now we are starting to talk about businesses, and that is doing me very well. That alienated person today knows how to say this agreement to me. This agreement is not good. I don't want people to renegotiate this way. This is bringing me satisfaction, guys. You know, and today I can say that I am much better than I've been at all the other phases of my life. What do you think of? On November 14th, we started talking about businesses, and that went really well. That person, who was so distant now, knows how to express this agreement to me. This agreement is not good. I don't want people to renegotiate this way. This is bringing me so much satisfaction, guys. You know, today I can say that I am much better than I've ever been in all the other phases of my life. What do you think of the story? Flavia comments here for me to know, and share this video with everyone. If you want to tell your story on our channel, just fill in the form that is here in the description of this video. The next history is from Fernanda, who worked on Grace for her ex-husband. She knows how long it's been for 10 years. You can lose so much, so you should subscribe now to the channel and activate the bell for YouTube to warn you when new content is available.